When I give this up, I'm going to become a media trainer because they're obviously so rubbish everywhere, and they train the government. They train people like Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves comes out, and if she speaks tough, then we think she is tough and that she doesn't make any mistakes.
Never makes mistakes.
So we've been able to return stability to the economy because of those difficult decisions. We had strong economic numbers in the first quarter of this year, so we're the fastest growing economy in the G7 at the moment. And as a result, and because we've listened to people's concerns about the level of the means test, we're now able this year to pay the winter fuel payment to 9 million pensioners.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves just performed one of the most humiliating political U-turns in modern British history, and the implications are absolutely devastating. We're talking about a £1.25 billion policy reversal that exposes a government in complete chaos, making decisions that impact 9 million vulnerable pensioners like they're playing a deadly game of political chess. But here's what they're not telling you. This isn't just about winter fuel payments. This is about a fundamental breakdown in government competency that threatens the very foundation of our economic stability. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this crisis runs deeper than anyone wants to admit. I'm going to break down every shocking detail, expose the real numbers they're hiding, and reveal the devastating consequences that are coming for all of us. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because this story is developing by the hour, and you cannot afford to miss what happens next. Let's dive into this political disaster that's unfolding before our very eyes.
I have said that we're going to do things differently. We're going to tell the truth, even when they are hard truths.
We had to make difficult decisions last year. The public finances were in a total mess when I became Chancellor last summer, and we had to take immediate action to get control and get a grip of the public finances. We have been able to do that. We've returned stability to the economy. In the first quarter of this year, our economy was the fastest growing in all of the G7, which now means we're able to make different choices, and that's why today I can announce that this winter 9 million pensioners will now receive the winter fuel payment.
Here's exactly what happened, and why it's sending shockwaves through Westminster right now. Just yesterday, Chancellor Rachel Reeves stood before the nation and announced a complete reversal of one of her government's first major policy decisions. The winter fuel payment cuts that were supposed to save the Treasury money? Gone. Completely abandoned. But here's the explosive part. She's not admitting she was wrong. Instead, she's doubling down with claims that the economy is now so strong that they can afford to reverse this decision. Let me repeat that. She's claiming the economy is stronger while businesses are closing down. Unemployment queues are growing, and families are struggling more than ever. This affects 9 million pensioners across England and Wales who will now receive their £300 winter fuel payments, but only if they earn less than £35,000 per year. Think about that threshold for a moment. We're talking about people who've worked their entire lives, paid into the system, and now they're being means-tested like they're applying for charity. The timeline here is crucial. When Labour took power, they immediately claimed there was a mysterious £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Even the Office for Budget Responsibility, who typically supports Labour policies, questioned where this figure came from. They couldn't verify it. They couldn't explain it. Yet this phantom deficit became the justification for targeting the most vulnerable members of our society. And now they're claiming they've magically found £1.25 billion to reverse this cruel policy. Where did this money come from? How did the economy suddenly become strong enough to afford this massive expenditure? These are the questions Rachel Reeves refuses to answer directly. Let me give you the hard facts that the mainstream media is glossing over, because these numbers tell a story of incompetence that should terrify every taxpayer in this country. First, the financial reality. When Labour took office, the UK economy was actually performing well relative to other G7 nations. The previous government had achieved significant growth momentum. But within weeks of taking power, this administration had somehow discovered a £22 billion deficit that nobody else could locate or verify. Here's what they did with that excuse. They immediately approved massive pay increases for train drivers, pushing their salaries to £70,000 per year. They gave doctors substantial raises. They increased spending across multiple government departments. But when it came to finding money, where did they look? At pensioners receiving £300 for winter heating. Let's break down the mathematics of this decision. The winter fuel payment affects approximately 11.4 million pensioners across the UK. The average payment is £300, with some receiving up to £600 depending on their circumstances. The total annual cost? Around £2.5 billion. They decided to cut this to save money, but somehow found £1.25 billion to partially reverse it within months. But here's the devastating part. The damage is already done. Pensioners have spent months in fear, not knowing if they could afford to heat their homes this winter. Some have already made heartbreaking decisions about choosing between heating and eating. Others have developed anxiety and health problems from the stress of this uncertainty. The government's own impact assessments, which were initially kept secret, revealed that this policy could lead to thousands of excess deaths among elderly people during cold weather. They knew this. They proceeded anyway. And now they're trying to claim they're heroes for partially reversing their own cruel decision. The new means testing threshold of £35,000 might sound reasonable, but let's examine what this really means. A pensioner who worked hard their entire life, saved money, and has a modest private pension alongside their state pension could easily exceed this threshold. They are being punished for their prudence and self-reliance. Now let's talk about the real controversy here, because what I'm about to reveal exposes the shocking truth about how this government really operates. This was never about money. This was about political messaging. Rachel Reeves and her advisors made a calculated decision to appear tough and fiscally responsible by targeting the group they thought would fight back the least. Think about that for a moment. They specifically chose to attack people who couldn't go on strike, couldn't organize mass protests, and couldn't defend themselves effectively. Internal sources suggest that when deciding where to make cuts, they deliberately avoided touching anything that would anger their traditional supporters, the trade unions, the public sector workers, the activist base. Instead, they looked for the most vulnerable target that would generate the least political resistance. But they massively miscalculated. They underestimated the British people's sense of fairness and compassion. They didn't realize that even people who aren't pensioners have parents, grandparents, and elderly neighbors they care about. The backlash was swift and brutal. Here's what makes this even more controversial. The timing of this reversal is suspiciously convenient. With local elections approaching and polling numbers showing significant damage to Labour's support, this U-turn looks less like economic policy and more like desperate political damage control. The human cost of this policy experiment cannot be understated. Elderly people have spent months living in fear, rationing heating, and worrying about their basic survival. Some have suffered health consequences from living in cold homes. Others have experienced severe anxiety and depression from the uncertainty. And let's talk about the broader implications for government credibility. If they can make such a fundamental error on a policy affecting millions of vulnerable people, what else are they getting wrong? What other policy disasters are brewing behind closed doors? The international implications are equally concerning. This kind of policy chaos damages Britain's reputation as a stable, predictable place to invest and do business. Financial markets don't respond well to governments that make major policy announcements only to reverse them within months. But perhaps most controversially, this exposes the fundamental dishonesty in their economic messaging. They claimed the economy was in crisis to justify harsh cuts. Now they're claiming the economy is strong to justify spending. Which is it? They can't have it both ways, and their contradictory statements reveal either incompetence or deliberate deception. So what happens next? And why should you be deeply concerned about the precedent this sets for everything that's coming? First, let's talk about the immediate consequences. This £1.25 billion has to come from somewhere. The government hasn't identified new revenue sources, which means either additional borrowing, adding to the national debt that your children will inherit, or cuts in other areas that haven't been announced yet. Watch for stealth tax increases in the coming months. Council tax rises, hidden fees, and regulatory changes that effectively function as taxes. They'll avoid calling them taxes, but the effect on your household budget will be the same. The precedent this sets is extremely dangerous. It demonstrates that this government makes major policy decisions without proper analysis, consultation, or consideration of consequences. They shoot first and ask questions later, with real people bearing the cost of their experimental approach to governance. Political analysts are predicting this could be the beginning of a much larger credibility crisis. When a government loses the trust of the electorate on such a fundamental issue, it becomes increasingly difficult to implement any significant policies. We could be looking at a period of political paralysis just when the country needs strong, decisive leadership. The opposition parties smell blood in the water. Expect them to use this as ammunition for months, possibly years to come. Every future Labour policy announcement will be met with skepticism and questions about whether they'll stick to their commitments or perform another humiliating U-turn. International observers are also taking note. The UK's reputation for stable, predictable governance has taken a significant hit. This could affect everything from trade negotiations to investment decisions by multinational corporations. But here's what I predict will be the most significant long-term consequence. This has opened the door for more radical policy experiments. Having survived this crisis through a simple reversal, the government might believe they can get away with other controversial policies as long as they're prepared to back down if the backlash gets too severe. This trial-and-error approach to governance is incredibly dangerous when dealing with complex economic and social policies that affect millions of lives. The human cost of policy experimentation is simply too high to treat governance like a laboratory for untested ideas. We're also likely to see increased scrutiny of all government economic claims. The mysterious £22 billion black hole that justified these cuts will continue to be questioned. If that figure was exaggerated or manipulated, it could lead to a much deeper investigation into this government's financial credibility. Let me share some insights that go beyond the headlines and reveal the deeper systemic problems this crisis exposes. Political communication experts are calling this a masterclass in how not to handle public policy. The fundamental rule of political communication is consistency. Your message must align with your actions, and your actions must be sustainable over time. This government failed on both counts. The economic analysis reveals even more concerning patterns. When you examine the sequence of decisions, massive pay increases for public sector workers followed by cuts targeting pensioners, it suggests a government that prioritizes political relationships over economic logic or social justice. Treasury insiders, speaking anonymously, have revealed that the original £22 billion deficit figure was largely based on spending commitments that the previous government had made but not yet implemented. In other words, it wasn't a hidden crisis but rather known future obligations that any incoming government would have inherited. This raises serious questions about the honesty of the political discourse surrounding this issue. Were the British people deliberately misled about the true state of the public finances to justify ideologically driven cuts to social spending? The comparison to successful economic management is stark. Previous chancellors, regardless of party, understood that credibility is the foundation of effective economic policy. When you lose credibility, you lose the ability to influence markets, manage expectations, and implement necessary reforms. International economic observers have noted that this kind of policy volatility is more characteristic of unstable political systems than of mature democracies. The UK's reputation for predictable, evidence-based governance has been significantly damaged. But perhaps most importantly, this reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern democratic societies function. Effective governance requires building consensus, consulting stakeholders, and implementing policies gradually with proper impact assessments. This government's approach of making dramatic announcements and then reversing them suggests they don't understand these basic principles of democratic governance. The social policy implications are equally concerning. Using vulnerable populations as political pawns to send messages about fiscal responsibility is both morally questionable and politically dangerous. It erodes the social contract that holds society together. So what can you do about this? How can you protect yourself and hold this government accountable for their actions? First, stay informed. This story isn't over. It's just beginning. The financial implications, the political consequences, and the policy reversals that are coming will affect your life directly. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. because I'll be tracking every development and giving you the analysis you won't get anywhere else. Second, engage with the democratic process. Contact your MP. Let them know that this kind of policy experimentation with vulnerable people's lives is unacceptable. Your voice matters, especially when combined with thousands of others who are equally concerned about governance standards. Third, prepare for the economic implications. This reversal will have costs, either through increased borrowing, higher taxes, or cuts elsewhere. Start thinking about how these changes might affect your household budget and financial planning. But most importantly, demand better from your government. Regardless of which party you support, you deserve competent, honest, and consistent governance. The bar has been set far too low, and we need to raise our expectations of political leadership. This crisis has revealed fundamental weaknesses in our political system that go beyond party politics. It's about the quality of decision-making, the honesty of public discourse, and the treatment of vulnerable citizens. These are issues that affect all of us, regardless of our political beliefs. The next few months will be crucial. Will this government learn from this disaster and improve their approach to governance? Or will we see more policy experiments that treat citizens like test subjects in a political laboratory? I want to hear from you. What do you think about this crisis? Are you satisfied with the government's explanation? Do you believe their claims about economic improvement? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and together we can hold our leaders accountable. Remember, in a democracy, the government works for us, not the other way around. This crisis is a reminder that we must stay vigilant, stay informed, and demand the highest standards from those who represent us.